I'd like to acknowledge that wherever we are this evening, we're gathered on Aboriginal land. I'm currently at my home on Bidjigal land, and I pay my respects to the Bidjigal people, to their elders past and present, and to all First Nations people, arts workers, artists, creatives and guests joining us on the webinar today. Please feel free to use the chat function to tell us which Aboriginal lands you're joining us from, and say hello and don't be shy. So thank you for joining us tonight for this conversation about finding a mentor. This is episode 5 of Create Exchange, which is a series of capacity building and knowledge exchange webinars focused on individual creative practitioners. My name is Beck Dean, and I'm a Senior Manager of Arts Strategy and Engagement at Create New South Wales. And also joining us from Create New South Wales are Isha Karnik, Yanni Clark and Ros Richardson, who are on the call. They'll drop into comments with links and help me if needs be with the questions as we move along. I'm a bit hoarse tonight, so if I start to fail, I might ask them to read out your questions. So tonight we're going to be talking with different creative practitioners from around New South Wales about their experiences with mentorships, either as mentors or mentees. And the topic of mentorships has been raised a lot with us over the last couple of years, particularly as we've been talking with the sector about their needs, and especially in the development of our creative communities, arts, culture and creative industries policy. And last year I was at an event and it was raised as a major theme by a gathering of the independent dance sector in Sydney, which was led by Theatre Network Australia and Dance Makers Collective. So there's a bit of a focus on dance and performance tonight as a consequence of that conversation. But we hope that whatever art form you're working in, that this conversation might give you the courage to seek out a mentor to support your professional development, or on the other side of things, for more experienced practitioners to see yourselves as having, valuable insights and experience to offer potential mentees. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Vicki van Hout. Vicki is a Wiradjuri woman born on the south coast of New South Wales who lives and works in Sydney. She's an independent choreographer, performance maker and teacher. And in 2019, she received the Australia Council's Award for Dance, among many other accolades and awards. Thank you for being here, Vicki. Rosie Dennis also joins us tonight. Rosie has a long history as a performance maker. She's a leader in community arts and cultural development and a seasoned festival director, and she's currently director of BAM, which is the Bank Art Museum in Moree in the northwest of New South Wales. Welcome, Rosie. We're also joined by independent choreographer Martin Delamo, who has over 30 years of professional practice across performance, dramaturgy and teaching. Martin also received the Creative Australia Award for Dance in 2024. Welcome, Martin. And finally, welcome to Marcus Whale, who will be known to many as a musician, fusing his vocals with electronic music, but whose work expands into immersive performance environments, including choreography. He's a current member of the band Perfect Actress, a former member of Collarbones and BV, and is a 6-time nominee for the Australian Music Prize. Hello, Marcus. So now we were to have 3 sets of mentors and mentees with us tonight, but illness and being overworked have struck out 2 of our guests, Nathan Stoneham and Thomas E.S. Kelly, but Rosie and Vicki are valiantly stepping up to talk about their mentor relationships with those 2 artists respectively. And before I hand over the conversation to Martin and Marcus, I thought we could talk about some common features and kinds of mentorships in the arts and cultural landscape, just to start us off. So when we talk about mentorships, what do we mean? So mentorships take many, many different forms, and there isn't really any kind of standardized definition of what a mentorship is. But usually they involve a more senior or experienced person offering support or imparting their knowledge and experience to a younger or less experienced person in the field in which they're working. And mentorships tend to aim to facilitate the mentee's professional development and growth. But usually the mentorships are of mutual benefit to mentor and mentee, as each side of that relationship develops new skills and knowledge. And trust and consistency also seem to be quite foundational in the development of a successful mentorship. And some of the common kinds of mentorships that you can come across are formal, where an institution or funding organisation or peak body might offer mentorship programs or opportunities with a set of designated mentors, and they might include fees and a designated program. Sometimes mentorships might be supported, but self-guided. So an institution or a funding organisation might support a mentee with time with a mentor that they've self-selected and a program that they're designed. But I think the most common kind of mentorship that certainly that I've come across is informal. It's where a mentorship might arise almost organically out of another kind of relationship, such as teaching. So something might have started off as an arrangement that then actually moves into a different kind of mentorship relationship. And then other kinds of mentorships are really focused around a particular skill or knowledge sharing. So in the one-on-one communication of a specific technique. So that's just by way of just kind of starting the conversation. And so now I'll turn off the PowerPoint and hand over to Martin and Marcus to tell us something about the mentorship relationship that they've built together.
Thank you, Meg. Our mentorship relationship is quite an unusual one because we had been collaborating as artists for nearly 10 years before the kind of mentorship aspect came to the fore. And just thinking this idea of finding a mentor, I'm going to throw to Marcus to talk about this a little bit, because I think he found me as a mentor when he wasn't really looking for a mentor at all. Marcus, do you want to just get us started a little bit?
Yeah. So just jumping off one of the things you said, Beck, about how, these kind of informal relationships often emerge quite organically. That's definitely the case for Martin and I. I first met Martin in 2012, working as a musician on a show of Martin's called Anatomy of an Afternoon. And my way in was my relationship with the composer Mark Bradshaw, who's another kind of mentor of mine. But it wasn't until I think 2021 that the idea of this more kind of 2022 revival. Ooh.
Yes.
Anyway,
recently the revival was in 2023, but we started working in 2022. Yeah.
2022. So like almost 10 years after we met, and after having worked together maybe 3 times in different capacities over the years, and I'd always admired Martin's choreography and artistry, but it was through an opportunity that was offered up by PACT, the theatre in Erskineville, that this happened. Martin was offered the chance to put together a new season of a performance that he'd made in 2004 called Unsealed, but with a newer. I don't want to use that word. Really, a less experienced artist, and I'm a musician and haven't really worked in dance at all. um, done stuff physically, but not in a kind of comprehensive way. And so Martin's kind of approach to me of performing this work of his from 2004 came with it the opportunity to kind of develop my skills as a performer and as a dancer now. And that was a little bit out of left field for me, but I was like very encouraged by it. And I think it took the form of these sort of weekly sessions where Martin would take me through some of his techniques and approaches, which was necessary, because I think at that point I didn't feel like someone who worked in dance or worked with those kinds of ways of making performance. But these kind of exercises and approaches that Martin passed down to me made it possible for me to then incorporate some of these ways of moving and making into my own work, and has sort of continued in the form of this weekly kind of studio sessions that we do, in which we're sort of working on choreographic ideas that are compatible with both of us, I think. And Martin's also been a choreographic consultant on a few of my shows around both after and a little bit before as well, the revival season of that 2004 work. Martin?
Yeah, that's great. Becky, you were saying that there are so many different kinds of mentorships, the more formal ones, the informal ones, and there's also when it comes to mentorship, there is no one size fits all kind of approach. Each mentorship is a very different one, and over the years, like Rosie and Vicki, I've been engaged in a lot of mentorships, and sometimes they were facilitated through organizations or initiatives by funding bodies. Sometimes they were initiated by the artists themselves, and I think this mentorship relationship with Marcus, very often it's the emerging artist that is looking and then finding a mentor. This was almost the other way around because of this particular opportunity at PACT. And I should say this initiative was called Revival. And it was not just me who was involved in that, it was also Vicki. Vicki and I, we were asked to revisit old works of ours, and we were given free rein as to what work we would choose and also with who we would be working. And because this particular solo of mine included text and a song, and I had more recently seen Marcus venture into performance making more strongly, so that he was the first person I could think of. And because I knew him mainly as a musician and as an artist completely in his own right, I remember when I approached him, and it was a scenario where there was no plan B at that stage, so like it wasn't like, if Marcus is not going to do it, I'm going to ask so and so. It was just let's see where that goes. But I was aware of that maybe Marcus wouldn't be interested in that, because when, as an emerging artist, you're trying to find your own feet and finding your own approaches to making work, someone else coming in and offering that opportunity to engage with their own strategies can be really useful. And luckily it worked out that seemed to be the case, but it's not always the case, and I was aware of that in that approach.
It's quite a it is quite an interesting and unique kind of way of starting to have that relationship together after having a relationship that delivered particular things. And
Yeah.
I think that what you're sort of describing is both of you stepping into a space where you're not like it's not a super comfortable space, but it's also a space for a very different kind of exchange and learning.
Yeah, and I think this is interesting, that I think for both of us, the focus was on it as a collaboration and an exchange. And the fact that it was framed as a mentorship, and Justine Pearson, who is the director of PACT, Center for Emerging Artists, I think was very clear that she wanted this mentorship to, in both cases with me and Vicki, to be reciprocal. Or the question was, can it be reciprocal? You know, so this idea that we were, even though I was, you know, it was an old work of mine and I was initiating the process, the way our working relationship kind of unfolded day to day was really exchange and collaboration. And the nice thing, when a mentorship like that is successful, the what can come out of it, you know, so like Marcus was saying, so this kind of shared practice that came out of that. And when I say shared practice, I'm looking at Rosie Dennis, who I had a shared practice with 20 years ago, which was an improvisation practice. But this idea of a practice that you meet once a week and you continue to practice together is something that I feel very strong about. And it was a great opportunity to make that come out of our experience at PACT. And then the possibility of continuing a kind of collaboration that we had before that. But so I'm making a work that Marcus is on as a sound artist, but now I'm also in the role of a choreographic consultant. And I hope over time that this switching of roles on each other's projects, you know, will find all kinds of different a variety of that, you know, which is only possible through that particular mentorship that we moment that we have, but also the practice that came out of that.
So can you talk us just through what a practice session looks like? What does your weekly kind of practice session look like?
I can see Marcus smile, because like the first hour and a half is mainly just chatting and gossiping and talking, which is kind of integral to the work, you know. So this to not separate who you are as a person and how you relate to each other, and who you are as an artist, the way you work together. So that's not always the case, and it doesn't work for everyone. But I think in our case and other people that I've been collaborating with, where the checking in with each other in a conversation style, talking about what's going on in one's life, thinking. We often talk about work and about approaches to work. As it's not just gossip, but it's always a lead into then working together, and it's kind of an exercise-based model, so where we're looking at strategies, you know, rather than this being skills being passed on. It's more an introduction into strategies and an exploration of strategies, and that has, you know, when at revival during that time, in the lead up to it, and during the development, where I was more in that classic mentorship role, where a lot of what I was doing was for Marcus to try out and try on. But now that this has become more of a like a shared practice, that even though what strategies are being looked at, often that comes from me, but I also do them. So it's not a one-sided thing. So like we're gonna let's have a look at this, and we explore this together, and then we show each other, so 3 minutes of this, 3 minutes of that. So they really get that exchange going, so that you blur the that kind of power dynamic of one person saying we're going to do this, and then the other person does that. So we are most of the time doing things together, and get to watch each other, and get to feed back to each other. Marcus, is there anything to add? Is that an accurate description of what's going on?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think the aspect of us both participating and watching each other and being kind of witnesses for each other, I think is an important part of the relationship, and the way in which it's more of an exchange, that the kind of less, I mean, yeah, like a lot of the strategies are like very deeply from your long history of practice, Martin, but there's a level to which our kind of equal contribution to the sessions make it more enriching, or like less hierarchical, because of that, and that I think is attractive to me, and maybe allows for our relationships to be more about creative exploration and creative expression. Yeah, and I think that's been one of the things that's really been fantastic about the relationship, is compared with some of my past sort of relationships with music teachers, for instance, which are also wonderful, but a lot more about this sort of master student dynamic. The kind of exchange that Martin and I have, it feels a lot more mutual, and that's I think that's been a really positive thing for me, to be able to unlock elements of my creative expression that you can't necessarily do in a more hierarchical relationship, I think.
I think the great thing about this kind of ongoing practice is also that you can keep it quite responsive to what's going on in the respective individual practices. So when Marcus last year had a performance coming at LifeWorks, or this work is touring to a Rising in Melbourne in June. So then this at some stage, these sessions will focus a little bit more on what's necessary, for Marcus in this case. But then also, when I have some gig or performance coming up, I'll use those sessions to, can you have a look at this and give me some feedback? So to keep it responsive, so it's not just a practice that there's definitely that kind of blue sky aspect to it, but and ongoing, but to anchor it in whatever else is going on in our respective practices.
It sounds like this incredible opportunity for the movement of ideas, the movement and development of ideas, while you're moving and developing movement as well in the space where you're working together. And I think it's one of the things about creative practice that can be challenging when people are sort of isolated and their thoughts don't get to find that discourse with other people, particularly if you're like, you've finished a schooling experience, you've finished a training experience, you might not be super well connected into the art world. But a relationship like this would seem to be a real kind of generator of movement in ideas for both of you. So I'm just trying to imagine, you know, the situation for artists who might not be so, you know, we're very well kind of resourced where we are in Sydney in terms of being able to find people, but just thinking about making time for that kind of connection and an ongoing practice is really amazing.
And I think and I hope this is helpful for those who are listening and hoping to get a mentorship practice going, because what we're talking about, this is like 13 years into some sort of a working relationship, you know, and to what you're saying, the chat and the exchange, this is why the chatting as friends is so integral to it, because, you know, whatever is going on in your mind in relation to work, you can voice and get feedback, you know, and sometimes you're going, oh, this is just, you know, I've been in this process and this happened, and to then hear another perspective, and this is where also, you know, Marcus says non-hierarchical, where it really, you know, as no matter how experienced you are or how long you've been around, you're constantly dealing with things that you have to negotiate and navigate and are weirded out by, and a lot of the time, and to be able to voice that within a working relationship is really great. That's the reciprocity that takes place, and being able to get for me to get a perspective of another artist, partly through being part of another generation, has sometimes, you know, a different perspective, is very, very useful in going. Yeah.
So I don't have any questions from the chat at the moment, but I wondered if Vicki or Rosie, if you have any questions or comments to Martin and Marcus about their experiences. Anyway,
questions, I'm sure.
I might now just give Martin and Marcus a bit of a rest and ask you guys joining us to have a think about questions you might want to ask. No question is a silly question. And I might hand over to Vicki to talk about the mentorships that, I mean, Vicki also has quite a few kind of teaching and mentorship kind of relationships as well. And it'll be great to hear your perspective, Vicki.
Well, I think I would have to say that all of the mentor, isn't that funny? All of the mentor kind of mentee relationships I've developed have grown out of my association with NSW. And so for Thomas E.S. Kelly in particular, I think, you know, I had him as a student in a formal kind of capacity for 4 years, and it was quite comprehensive with that year. And there has been a shift in the presence and visibility of, you know, the increasing visibility of Indigenous arts practice within festivals and like the responsibility for programming. But I would have to say that still, when I was, you know, there, I think the slam dunk, it used to be the slam dunk for a lot of the students at NSW would be a position at Bangarra. And I think for Thomas, you know, he did have those dreams, and I just remember that it was seen at first for him as a big loss or something, not lost, but it was a negative that he, you know, that he didn't, you know, he wasn't a Bangarra dance company member. And I do remember us sitting in the office and just saying, well, you know, now you have to make the work, you know, you make the work for yourself, that you make the work that you want to be in, and you be in that work, you know what I mean? You make it. You don't wait for somebody to sanction you. And so not that that is a bad, not that that's a negative indictment on Bangarra. I mean, it just is that the visibility is so high, and there was so little opportunity, so few opportunities before. And I think at first it was so that he didn't feel like he was stepping into an abyss, so that he didn't feel alone, so that he didn't feel like, oh my God, I've just spent 4 years, studying, every day, turning up to NSW, and then just step out and not know where I'm going. And so I really feel for myself as well that so before we had like some kind of formal financial agreement, because that came later, on and off in spurts, as a consultant on his works. And I've just always, I think, just saying, being the champion of the person, the odd bod, giving those people like the courage to just say, look, I'm not going to wait for somebody to sanction me. And so I saw that there were a whole group of people actually that could benefit from somebody, or just having somebody that they could call up, or that they could speak about their fears, or that so maybe my role as mentor was not primarily to show them the way or give them strategies. It was just to say, there's somebody on the end of the line. If you've got a silly idea, we can talk about it. Or if you have if you feel like there's nothing, or there's no one out there, that you can call me. So I developed out of bounds relationships with not in a bad way. Oh my God, that sounds wrong. At NSW with quite a few students. I remember Tari Sansbury, who is Thomas's partner. I remember her speaking to me, going, Vicki, why do you send me these videos of these other artists? So I feel like it was an issue. Also, I have to say that I feel my demonstration of who I am as an Aboriginal person is being a part of the continuum, and it is this idea of obligation and reciprocity that I take seriously. So I have been given these amazing opportunities myself, and I feel that a part of that, it's not just them, and I would say this with all of us as mentors, it exceeds the remuneration, financial kind of remuneration. And I feel that this is a mantle or a progression, and it is a learning curve for me as well. So I'm not, to take responsibility and to show. So I'm kind of maybe an elder in waiting. That's how I see the role. So it also exceeds the boundary of the arts, and so it's us as people, and so it's us as elders, so that in an Indigenous capacity, people call me up and ask me about what's this idea of protocols, and how do I get something off the ground in my community. And so those sorts of things in the reanimation and the reactivation of cultural practice, it is about us devising or being our own contemporary Indigenous kind of quorum. So the network is, so what NSW represents for me is it exceeds topography and familial kin. So I feel that NSW is a hub that is its own kin, that it has its own kinship. We are a part of the NSW kin, and that, so my relationship with those students, and even I would say, and it's not confined to those students, it's anybody that's touched, that's come into contact with NSW. So this would extend to Raghav Handa, for instance, who came to me as through Marilyn Miller as a 19-year-old boy who wanted to dance. He didn't have the money to go to Sydney Dance Company. You could look at Sydney Dance Company from NSW then, which was underneath the bridge. He could look at it, but he couldn't quite afford it. He was a high school he'd just finished high school. And so what is really, I am honoured that he's now reinvigorated and found and discovered his own, Indian contemporary practice, Australian kind of diasporic Indian practice through learning Indigenous or adopting Indigenous paradigms. So this also, when we're talking about us learning as much as the mentee, that has been my relationship with Raghav has prompted me to look at the application, like a greater application for utilising Indigenous knowledge which exceeds just our Indigenous imperative. So this is, and yes, there's a lot of gossip. So the relationship that I have with all of the artists, I think has extended through, has not been prompted by some kind of initiative, but the initiative those initiatives of which, Create New South Wales provides, has facilitated something that was already ignited before, it's just, and I feel, and sometimes it is just people coming up to you and speaking to you, but the main ones for me are through my association with NSW as a hub, or as something that exists outside, that can grow outside of the institution. So for me, what is really interesting as well is that it is a place. So what is interesting is that a culture can, like Indigenous culture, can be transmitted and facilitated through these kind of institutional or organisational spaces, as well as on country. So it's not just confined. So for a lot of people, for instance, who have just discovered or found their indigeneity, and for me as well, it's like exploring how that's useful. What does it mean so I think for me as a mentor, God, I'm not as articulate or as eloquent as you, Martin, or Marcus. I'm terrible, but I feel that it exceeds kind of the artistic imperative as well. So it's facilitating my role, and it's through the arts that my role is extends to people consolidating their link or their position in the cultural continuum. So I feel that there's this is really important, that people are discovering how to research and connect with the past and be a part, find a divergent but really satisfying way to be a part of the future. That we all have different pathways. And so this is something that I find that myself as an Indigenous person, that's an imperative, that I'm facilitating these kind of relationships and discussions, and but we all do this through politics. We all are. And that protocols is something that we all use. Protocols is not some punitive thing that is related just to Aboriginal practice. It is about how we relate to each other and how we You know, so the idea of just inviting somebody into the network is, I see that's what we do as mentors. It's like going, you're not alone. You know, that we're not reinventing the wheel, and that you don't have to slog it out, that you can ask. And also what I love about being a mentor is the robust discussion and seeing somebody have the guts to say, no, I don't agree with you. I don't like that. I'm not going in that direction. So I'm not just there to be, just like you, Martin and Marcus, it's not about me being the boss, but it's me just putting a provocation out there so that, you know, so that, you know, so that maybe somebody can consolidate who and what they are and what their practice is by what they are not interested in doing or completing or taking up, as much as what they do pick up. So I would say that Thomas and I have had some heated discussions. There's been a lot of talking down the phone, and our relationship has changed as well. So just like you, Martin, our relationship has continues to evolve. So it something that may have been, because of our life experience, something that may have been one-sided or whatever, because, you know, we'll have always been on the planet longer than they have. Now I have worked for Tom, and so Tom has been the boss. I have not been a good employee, but, you know, those sorts of things. And, you know, this is something that it keeps also as a mentor, it keeps your foot in the door. So you're always excited and sparked, and, you know, you see, like, if I didn't have those relationships with, you know, people like Amy Flannery, who, you know, through PACT, and and Tari and Tom, and Raghav, if I didn't have those relationships, I would become stale pretty quickly.
Vicki, can I so there's a few things that you talked about that are really sort of resonating with this this mentorship subject about sort of pathways. You know, you were talking about the pathway from NSW to Bangarra, and that didn't work out, and then you were there, you know, with Tom to basically say you got to do it yourself. And, you know, I've posted Tom's project with Tari Carroll projects, which he is doing himself. And, you know, Raghav Handa, you talked about him looking at Sydney Dance Company, and he's worked with them now, you know. So they've all, like, that path, it's just a different, like, you don't always get to do the thing that you think you're going to be able to do directly. And that's one of the things that I think mentorships offers along that pathway, is that, you know, it's a very hard road to be an independent artist, and to have, you know, an intergenerational kind of opportunities to exchange and to share knowledge and to, you know, and to learn from each other through that, I think is a really important thing that, you know, you'd hope that as we get sort of, you know, more kind of disconnected in some ways, that it is something that still retains value and people find useful, as you say, Vicki.
Yeah, and because we're so in relationship to other, like, as contemporary in this, like, the contemporary landscape, we're still building, as Indigenous practitioners, we're still building literacies. We're still forging pathways. We're looking at, you know, oh God, I swear the two words I hate the most are going on a journey and decolonizing something. They both of those words, oh my God, it's like I've just shoved my mouth full of aspartame. But I will say, this is, you know, this is the thing that I'm always, you know, we champion, so that there's two different things as a champion of Indigenous culture in Australia, through dance, contemporary dance, as you're as my what do you call it, as my idiom or whatever. What is really interesting is that, you know, we can be diverse, and that we have to, but at the same time we're accountable. We've got different measures of accountability, and so it's navigating that, and it's letting audiences know that, or it's getting audiences accustomed to the fact that we can't make the same kind of, sometimes we don't have the freedoms to make the same inroads. But that amongst us as Aboriginal, you know, practitioners, it is also, so I remember once Martin Delamo was in a talk at Carriage Works, and I think it was and it was with Marilyn Miller was the convener of the panel, and we were talking about like limitations, that limitations also can give us a lot of freedom, that they take away this blue sky. Sometimes the blue sky thinking, there are so many opportunities that you can get lost trying to find your way. But sometimes it's finding the canny, you know, finding the canny path or like way of breaking the rules, or being in a, working within a guideline can also be a freedom, can also be a tool. And so I feel that for me and I try to spark as a mentor or as an older practitioner, I try to show people, or just by demonstration, showing people that, yes, I work within these kind of boundaries, but that because Indigenous art is my my raison d'etre or my passion, it is also my biggest tool, and it has also been and given me opportunities to create for which I wouldn't have probably thought about if I had gone a different pathway. And so that for me is very big as a specific kind of mentor to the people that I'm working with, that it's the limitations and those, it's those limitations that actually are your freedoms.
Thank you, Vicki. It's been really, really fantastic to hear you talk about that, and particularly from within that your First Nations kind of context as well. Can we now move over? I've got there's a few questions piling up, but I think I'll put them to all of you. Rosie Dennis, handing over to you.
Hello.
Here she is.
Great. Yeah, look, it's great to listen to Marcus, Martin and Vicki. So just, you know, lots of agreeing with lots of things that you're both all saying. I was meant to be here this evening with Nathan Stoneham, and Nathan, as Beck mentioned at the top of the meeting, is really unwell, but he wrote some notes, and I thought it might be good. I'll just sort of summarize some of the things that he has said. He's just taken the time to write it, so I thought that'd be interesting to do. But Nathan approached me back in 2014, but it was sort of the early 2010s that Creative Australia, which was then the Australia Council, had a program called the Jump Mentorship Program. It might have gone for 5 years. I actually can't remember, but it was a really great. It was really fantastic, and I think you got sort of like $3,000 or $5,000. I can't remember exactly how much money, but it was enough to kind of feel like you could start a conversation with someone, and you know, not have to be asking for a favor, really, because I think someone in the chat said, how do you go about people being busy? I'm certainly not suggesting as a mentor you're doing it for the money, because you're not. But we met through that program, and I didn't know Nathan at all. So it was really bold when you don't know someone to kind of approach a person who equally, you know a bit about what they've done, but not very much at all. And Martin hinted at this, and Marcus, you did as well, just around Nathan was recommended to get in touch with me. So even though he didn't know me, he was looking for support and looking for a mentor and looking for someone to kind of expand his practice a little bit. And so it was a mutual colleague, Lanine Burke, who said, I think you should go and email Rosie. I'll introduce you. So it's always really great if you don't know someone to get an endorsement from someone else, because it just fast tracks everything. And so that was how really we met. And Nathan was successful in Jump, and he came and worked on and off, like when I was working in a company called Urban Theatre Projects. So Nathan, through the course of his mentorship, would pop to Bankstown, and he'd, you know, spend a couple of days in the company and come and just do things with me. He just wanted to see what you did when you ran a small company. So he found that really useful, is what his notes say. And he didn't actually realise that that could be a job. You know, he was from a Brisbane-based independent artist and found it a really liberating experience to go, wow, you can be a creative, you can sit within a small company structure, you can make work, you can engage with community, you can have a team of people around you who are value aligned as well. So that was really a positive thing for him. And he's kind of broken our mentorship, because it's been for a long time now. So 2014, so that's 11 years, is that right? We've known each other over three sorts of parts. So professional development, which I definitely worked with him in that kind of way, which was to, you know, just share process, practice, have him kind of talk about the things that he wanted to do. And really, I always thought of my role, if ever I'm mentoring anyone, as a connector kind of thing, because you want to be useful. Like, there's sort of no point working with someone who, you know, wants to be or do or go somewhere without saying, okay, maybe you could try this person, or I can link you with this person, or why don't you go on, here's a list of websites, go and check out these people. So, you know, you're really wanting to support someone in their practice, basically. And creative development was another way that we worked together in this role, where Nathan would invite me into rehearsals and I would have a look. So that was up in Brisbane. He was working at Metro Art, so I would drop in, and he, again, a bit like how Martin and Marcus says, although I don't know how you practice, but it's really supportive. But in terms of feedback, what's going to work? And so you sort of get a bit of a sense, you know, it's good practice as well. Nathan would tell me what he was looking for, or what I might be looking for in his work, or what he wanted me to look at. So it's not this go and critique the work, or go give me any sort of feedback, Rosie. It was always, we're looking at this part, can you tell me what you think of this? So again, I thought that was really enjoyable, because it was really clear for me about how I could support him. And then it was personal development, well, which was new for me to read today for Nathan. And he sort of, here for him is around, he was just sort of saying that I picked up on his queer sensibilities and how he wanted to work outside of systems and still connect with community. But if you don't know Nathan, like, he's quite a gentle soul in the world, and he's done a lot of different things, from making live performance. He's performed, he's written a book, but he doesn't, you know, he's a musician as well. Like, he's really multi-talented, but it's almost like incrementally his practice sort of built over a number of years, working with a lot of different people, but certainly his identity has informed, you know, a lot of his collaborations. So that's really great. And one of the questions that we've got given was how our relationship continues. And, you know, Beck mentioned that I was doing some work on festivals. So sort of a couple of years ago, I think I invited Nathan and Lenine actually to come and work on, or make a work in a festival that I was directing. I've also gone to Nathan's book launch. He had a book launch when I was in Brisbane. So we've managed to just tic-tac. Nothing, wouldn't say we're friends, but we're definitely fond of each other. And if I was ever invited to anything of Nathan's, I'd try and go if I was in that place. And similarly, I've extended invitations to him over the last 10 or 11 years to do different things if I've felt like he's been a good match in terms of his practice and his process. So he's found it really helpful to have someone experienced to talk about it. I'm just going to read from him now. To have someone to talk about artistic work and career paths, and it really helps when values align between the mentor and mentees. And he continues to engage mentors formally and informally, because he finds it really useful as a way to give a concentrated period of time to have a conversation about process and practice, because otherwise it can slip away. And he's also enjoying from time to time stepping into that role where he might be able to you know, have a reciprocal kind of mentor-mentee relationship with someone. So that's a little bit about Nathan's experience of how we sort of work together. And so that's good. Thank you, Nathan. And then for me, I mean, I'm always, it's funny because sort of I haven't mentored anyone for a long time, but I kind of have as well, in a funny sort of way, because when you're working on a festival, which I did for 6 years, which is sort of a pretty big chunk of time actually, you know, most days you're meeting and talking with artists about work. Like, I don't actually think there's not one day you're doing that. And there's so many different things to consider. And so you're and you know, in any kind of role that's public facing, and your role is with public investment, you do, you know, want to be encouraging people at any stage in their career to find a way to make it work for themselves. It doesn't mean, because we all know it's not easy. And most of the time, success comes with consistency, you know, because you keep on doing it. And you also then, I guess, have to really define what success looks like for you. And some people want to be rock stars and be famous, and other people are just really happy to create a new work because it's moved them on in their own personal practice to the next thing that they're going to be making. So it's a really and I really enjoy that process, because like Vicki and Martin have both said, you don't want to work in isolation because you've got a body of work. Like, that's just boring. And particularly if you're a contemporary artist, we're all living in the same time now. So age does kind of filter, and experience filters how you can perceive things. So having conversations with people who, you know, you don't have to be younger to be a mentor and a mentee. Like, I think the whole age thing's sort of irrelevant actually. But different perspectives in that concentrated relationship are really healthy and good. And, you know, I'm all for framing, and that's what a mentorship does. That just gives you a frame for that period of time to be with that person, to have a series of conversations about either a work like Martin and Marcus sometimes do, or about a process or a practice or an idea. So yeah, so I think that's pretty much all I've got to say, unless you ask me a question, Beck.
Well, I think I've got questions for, I think, all of you, just on a sort of basic level, I guess, for people who are really like, haven't had a mentorship before, might be interested in asking someone or talking to someone. Rosie, you mentioned, you know, sometimes it's beneficial if there's someone who's might be an intermediary that you can contact to make an approach on your behalf. But I think, you know, Vicki's experiences, you know, with Raghav sounded more like he just came up to her and asked the question. So I think I'd love to hear from you guys in terms of, like, I guess, any encouragements or approaches that you might offer the people on the call to sort of to start something.
I saw that someone put a question in as a who of the emerging artists actually does approach independent artists that are very busy, and I would always encourage people to approach, if you feel you want to work with someone or that their practice aligns with what it is that you want to explore, do approach people, you know. And the worst thing that can happen is that someone says no, and usually that will be because they're too busy or there is a clash of dates. I don't think any of us three has ever said no to someone who shows interest in being mentored just for the sake of saying no, there can be clashes of dates, but sometimes also, I think we're talking about how things evolve and how things take time. That can happen, that you approach someone and they say, this sounds really interesting, I'm actually not available at the moment. But maybe, as you keep in touch, something can happen further down the track. So it's always worth to make that initial step and contacting someone. I would say, and it's both Vicki and Rosie, you've mentioned some of the initiatives that were around. So it is great when they select the Jump mentorship, or in our case, Marcus and myself, and together with Vicki, where an arts organization kind of creates a project that has this mentorship program. Mm-hmm. The thing that it does is it creates a formal structure to work within, and also where payment is taken care of, so you don't need to worry about that. Later, if you want to continue working with each other, then you figure that out. But as Vicki was also saying, especially if there's funding coming in for certain projects. But yeah, I am aware that some of the initiatives that did exist in the past, are not currently around. And I know that some organizations are trying to fill the gaps and have some of those initiatives. But they are usually, you need to apply for them, and then you either get them or you don't. So I think I would encourage people to be proactive in seeking out mentors.
Just encourage questions to go into the chat if anyone wants to ask any other questions. I think what Martin raised is very true. There are limited kind of opportunities out there, and from time to time there will be a renewed focus around mentorship, potentially from different parts of arts and culture funding, but it is really worthwhile connecting with development organisations like PACT, like the regional arts development organisations that are based across New South Wales, becoming a member of NAVA if you're in the visual arts, or any of the other kinds of societies and peak body organisations that engage with particular areas of practice. There'll often be mentorship opportunities that come up, but they don't necessarily, on a continuing and sort of ongoing basis. So you sort of have to keep your eyes open for those.
One thing I was going to say, Beck, is just like all of the things so to date, and there's been, because I'm just reflecting on some of the relationships I've had. It's Nathan said it in his notes. The successful ones are value aligned. So if you're approaching someone because, I don't know, you want to get more work, or there's, you're hoping to do this or that with your own career, it's probably starting from a place that's, you haven't even built the relationship yet. So I think, the most successful mentorships I've ever had have been one where the first time has been used to build a relationship. So you trust each other, because you're not doing it for money, but there still is an exchange. You also want to make sure that, everyone's kind of respected in that. And just like a mentor, you're not telling someone what to do, but similarly, you're not feeling like someone's working with you because they're looking for access in X, Y, and Z, if that makes sense. Build the relationship first with the person.
Yeah, so that sort of comes to sort of answers a question that Karen has put in the chat about suggestions for artists framing a request for a person to mentor them. Is I think Rosie's kind of established that sort of idea of just starting a relationship in the first place, making that connection. Sorry, did I interrupt Martin?
Vicki, did you want to say something? You just put your finger.
Yeah, I just wanted to say also that there are, for those people who maybe don't think how do I say it? For those people who don't think that they could be a mentor, I think that there's so much, like, it's so enriching to be a mentor, because what it does is it encourages the artist to also reflect it. It encourages us as an artist or as a mentor to start reflecting more deeply on our practice, you know. And I noticed, because I have inadvertently been mentored by both Rosie and Martin in different capacities. So working with Rosie was very, she wasn't a mentor in that kind of formal capacity, but working with Rosie, you could see that Rosie has a very decisive practice, even when working something out. And I think being a mentor and always working within with different people in the community, what that does is it enriches, or that really, the knowledge that you passed on to me, Rosie, you could see that I've benefited. So it's that it's grown my practice. And this wasn't a formal mentorship, but this is, I think you gain those skills. Those skills are, it makes you a better creator when you offer what little knowledge you have to share that with somebody else. And also you, Martin, just modeling. So that just the fact that you're modeling when I was with Martin maybe didn't mentor me per se to go, this is so mentorship can come in lots of different guises and can be, like you said, Beck. So the guises for me were working with somebody, but those things stayed with me, and also with Martin as a role model. So not necessarily even explaining what that thing is that you do, but just being there to say, right, come in the room and be in the room with me, or be in the, to just share a practice. So I think the models for mentoring don't necessarily mean that there's instruction. Yeah.
Two things. So, like, one, just following up on what you say, Vicki, about the benefits of being a mentor. I was talking to Marcus earlier today, and so he's recently been approached to be a mentor as part of a lab at Shopfront Theatre, and so, like, this is great when in also our working relationships, because then you can start comparing notes, so that someone who feels they have been mentored then in a more formal way also becomes a mentor. That's interesting pathway, so that you really keep that sense of reciprocity going, so, like, not just within a relationship, but also in respect of the larger community. The other thing I wanted to say is, like, the question, how do you approach a mentor? And that can be quite daunting, so, like, in some cases, I think some artists might know who they want to approach, but if you feel my practice, I would like to work with the mentor, I'd like to have the feedback, and you don't have one in mind. I think Rosie was mentioning that, or maybe it was Beck, maybe it was both, to connect with organizations or producers who might have a little bit of experience with connecting people, and just going, this is where I'm at, this is what I feel I need. Is there any kind of direction that you can point me towards? I think that can be useful. And I think most of the time when you are searching for something, my experience is always people want to help. If they are in a position to do so, they will, and to just keep those look for people who can connect you.
Yeah, in general, our communities are very generous and interested. Interested. We're all interested in new ideas, in talking about art. And, it's like, I think probably some of that courage can come from knowing that, it is an interested and generous community.
And the reality, whoever you approach, they would have been in a very similar position as you were, 20, 30 years earlier. So this is like what goes around comes around kind of scenario. So especially as independent artists, it's like we all know the difficulties and the trickinesses of needing to be connected and needing to exchange. So a lot of people will always keep that in mind when they're being approached.
I think Ruben has written in something that's really interesting about, understanding that a mentor has success and failure. And it's important to understand, the failures as well and their equal importance. So don't sort of idolize a mentor's success because it's not going to, just because you have a mentorship with someone who's successful doesn't mean that you're going to basically follow that exact path yourself. Thanks for that, Ruben. And there's some other people saying that, collaboration is a really great way to work and to exchange ideas. There's some other people that are asking advice about setting up a multimodal dance arts community. I don't know if I can answer that question or that we can probably answer that question at this very moment, but very happy to take your question on, Helen. If you want to talk to anyone at Create New South Wales, maybe put you in touch with some people. This has been a really wonderful, enriching conversation, and everybody has been very generous with, letting us know about their practices as mentors and mentees. I think, Vicki, do you have your finger up to say something? Yes.
I have learnt over the years that it is not, I've been more instrumental, sorry, I'm over the flight path. Kill me now, flight path. Instrumental or as a mentor when I'm looking to find out what it is that person wants to do. So when you're looking to find a mentor, it's not necessarily, even though we're sharing, I agree, you share the same values, and interests. I always, as a mentor, have to be mindful that the person I'm mentoring, that I'm in a mentoring relationship with, it's my imperative to try to uncover the artist that they are, the voice that they are. And sometimes it's not through, so it's always murky, because sometimes it's not, so sometimes it's really hard for me. I don't know if this is for you as well, Rosie or Martin, because so sometimes when I'm giving advice or when I'm sharing something, I can only go from my past experience. And so when I'm going from my past experience, it's not that I'm wanting them to emulate me, but it's sometimes that I don't have the skills, or I don't know how to get from them the thing that, the pathway for them to get there. So sometimes as well, when we're uncovering or we're working together, you don't always have, I think they have to know that the mentor doesn't always have the answers. We are negotiating something, and that there's lots of different ways of trying to uncover that thing from the other person, or to get the best from them. So sometimes I'll give an example of myself, but it's not that I want them to go down the same road, but I think that in telling them what I've done, they might find their road on the telling of the thing that you've done. your experience. Go, Rosie, sorry.
I was going to add to that, Vicki. It's if you're mentoring and it's part of a process like a creative development, your mentor is not your director or your dramaturg. So that's where it's, you want to be really clear on that relationship, because it is, as Vicki's saying, there's so many different ways you can go, but it's about that role, that mentor role, supporting you to find out what you want to say and how you want to say it. And then work with a director or a dramaturg.
Definitely. There are a couple of quite long questions in the chat, but we probably don't have time to answer them at the moment. And I did want to thank all of our participants for this conversation, which has become really wonderful, and for all of your different insights and the ways that you've been working. I did want to use the last couple of minutes just to spruik a bit of an opportunity that is at Create New South Wales for you to apply for a program that could include a mentorship. So if you'll bear with me, I just wanted to take you through this last couple of minutes just to put you in the way of one of our funding programs, which is called Next Steps. And this is to support professional development for individuals to enable participation in skills development opportunities. So this one is a, in the kind of self designated kind of professional development. It isn't something where we're telling you who you get to work with and how, but it enables career development for artists and arts and cultural workers. It can support opportunities that develop cultural leadership, promote professional development and collaboration, and encourage personal wellbeing and resilience. So it can include workshops, courses, a mentorship program, residencies and fellowships, conferences and networking events. They're all included in what you could apply for here. And artists and or arts workers can apply for up to $10,000 to support a professional development opportunity. And this round we've designed to improve upon the scope of the small project grants that we used to run, which enables a better planning and support for individuals to undertake activities. So this is the assessment and the idea, the diversity and participation, why you want to do it, who's involved, and what you're going to spend your money on. These are the key sort of assessment criteria that you'll be asked to deliver on. And the things that you can apply for include the things you need to cover to make sure your project is a success. You can rent or hire space. You can apply for travel and accommodation. You can apply for fees for the development opportunities. You can apply for costs of materials. You can apply for paying artists' fees, which is always a thing that we encourage, is to sort of value your time, value the time of your mentor potentially. And you can also apply for things that you haven't, fully confirmed at the time of the application being due. And the contribution is at least 5% from other cash or in-kind support for your project. So Create New South Wales would cover 95% of the project amount. So thank you, everybody. Oh, Vicki, do you have a question? I see the finger has risen.
All disciplines, isn't it? These mentorships are across all disciplines, even though we're primarily dance and other, movement, choreographic and other disciplines. The mentorships are across all performative or all?
Everything. So we have 10 different art form boards that assess these applications. So it's everything from visual arts to digital to experimental. So it covers everything. And I did want to just reflect on this because, we are including mentorships within the scope of activities that basically you could apply for. So if you had something that you wanted to do, the opportunity is open right now. One more, Vicki.
And is it specific that either the mentee or the mentor are residents, or do both of them have to be residents of New South Wales?
I think it would. I think yes, the person applying would need to be in New South Wales. So the person applying for the opportunity would need to be in New South Wales. Yeah. So I think Berlin-based arts worker who's creating opportunities for New South Wales artists. I think if the New South Wales artist wanted to work with you, Ruben, then they could apply. And I think with Susan's question, you could probably check in with our arts funding team, but I think the application would need to come from an individual. It's really to support individual development, so it would have to be authored by an individual. Oh, thanks, Ali Murphy-Oates is on the call, putting all the information into the chat. Thank you, Ali. Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody. We're running close to time. I just want to thank all of our amazing participants. I think if we'd had 2 other guests, we would have struggled to make it in time, I think, for a 7 o'clock finish. But as usual, conversation amazing between all of you guys, and hope that everybody had a great time listening to this experienced group of people talk about what can be a very fruitful, productive relationship that we all encourage that you try in your careers as artists. Thank you very much, Rosie, Vicki, Martin, and Marcus.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.